Hello there, everyone, and welcome back to the Showing Up to Life podcast and YouTube channel. Art Burns is my name, and I'm excited to be here with you. I don't know what to do with that intro. I really don't. I know I've said this probably 100 times out of the 700, and I think today's the 707th or 8th episode of this, and I've said this probably 100 times that I need to just pre-record something. So someday, I promise. Anyway, something popped into my head. No, it didn't. That's the thesis for this episode today. We always say that, right? We say, "Oh, something popped into my head," or one of my other favorites is, "I have to wrap my head around this," right? And so what this indicates, and I mean, it's not a big deal or anything. It's not something like, "Oh man, you should never say that, and you're a terrible person if you say that." Nothing like that at all. But it's inaccurate. And I think the inaccuracy of that statement, I need to wrap my head around it, or something just popped into my head, or I've lost my head, or these kind of terms. You know, I think as we use these terms, there's a subtle, sort of acquiescence, if you will, that happens through the use of these, sort of cliched, hackneyed terms. And so what I mean by that is, I'm sure that's really what's important here. What the heck is he talking about here, right? So when we say that, right, when we say something popped into my head, or I need to wrap my head around it, right, we're indicating that all the action of all of our knowledge and all of our ability to cognate, our ability to process, our ability to understand, our ability to know, which includes, of course, our ability to relate to each other, right, is all happening within the confines of the skull. Which is simply not true, my friends. Simply not true. In fact, even just from a physiological standpoint, this brain that's called the skull-encased brain is just one of the brains in your body. Very really. This is not woo-woo. This is not some spiritual concept. There are neurons, the same neurons that compose your brain, right? There's different cells in your brain, right? But the ones that are nerve cells that communicate with each other in what we call thinking and knowing and remembering are the same. We have the same exact neuronal cells that are in our skull-encased brain that also surround our hearts and also surround our gut. So when we say, "Oh, I have to wrap my head around this thing," it's not even accurate from the standpoint of where your brain is. It's limiting. It's inaccurately limiting the power that you have in terms of your ability to, to functionally process and know things, including remembering things, and including, very importantly, the ability to relate to one another. Now, one of the most important, or one of the most impactful ways that mindfulness works is in this sort of what we call the mind-body connection. But let's talk even about the mind for a second, because the mind is not the brain. And the brain is not the mind. The mind includes the brain, or the three brains, as I just mentioned, right? Not just the skull-encased brain, but also the brain of the heart and the brain of the gut. All of these are included in what we call the mind. But the mind is certainly not limited to these three aspects of or these three brains in our body, let's say. Which is to say, now, first of all, let's pause here and say something very, very important. There is no accepted definition of the mind. And in fact, I have been told by no fewer than 4, maybe more teachers of mine who are everyone from scientist teachers to Buddhism teachers, right, and spiritual teachers. At least four of these professionals have told me that that they've used this specific term, that the person who comes up with the definition, the accepted definition of the mind is going to win the Nobel Prize. Like, no question asked. right? Because that's how important it is, and that's how sort of elusive it is. Not important, but elusive. And misunderstood, and not only misunderstood, but it's like the kind of misunderstanding that like you know, like asking like a kindergartner to understand trigonometry, right? It's just beyond the grasp to understand what the mind really is. And that's why nobody can really define it, not specifically and not in a way that is accepted by everyone else. Of course, everybody has their opinion of what the mind is, and everybody's got their theories of what the mind is, but there's no, you know, because the mind is not something that you can take out of someone's body and put into a little stainless steel tray and say, there's the mind, right? We can do that with the skull encased brain. We can see the neuronal cells that surround the heart and the neuronal cells that surround the gut. We can see those things. Just like I can pick this pen off my desk and hold it in my hand. We cannot do that with the mind, because the mind is not a thing. The mind, and I'm going to default to my old friend Dan Siegel, as you know I'm going to, right? Because I love him, and I really, I just really appreciate the way he approaches the stuff that he approaches. You know, that's really the thing. I think there's so many of these scientists who are saying pretty much the same things, right? But you know, you vibe with certain, you resonate with certain ones, right? And Dan Siegel is one of those guys that I really resonate with, you know? And and so I'm going to defer to him again and say that the mind, as he describes it, the mind is I'm not going to remember his exact words, but it's the way we process and regulate the flow of energy and information. Okay, that's a lot. It's a big mouthful. The processing of energy, the processing and regulation of energy and information flow. Okay, because everything is energy and information, right? We get, you know, stimuli coming in, our brain converts it to, you know, to energy, right? This information gets converted to energy, and then that energy becomes either our response to it verbally, something we write, something we dance, whatever it is we do, right? And so the mind is the way that all happens. That's the easiest way the way that I believe is the easiest and most accessible way to look at it, okay? And so why is that important? Okay, because as I began to say before we took this little sidebar for the mind and the definition of the mind, which we're still not really defining, is so we talk about the mind-body connection, right? And in a lot of ways, I think that is also sort of, you know, giving the mind a little, or giving the brain and the skull a little bit too much real estate over, or too much, you know, sovereignty over the mind, right? And so really, you know, but I think it's important anyway to look at it this way, right? Because, you know, Jon Kabat-Zinn says in one of his books that human beings, you know, walk through life thinking that our body and our shoulders and our neck and stuff are just there to hold our head so that we can think our way through life, right? And that's the way it feels for most of us, and that's the way it sort of manifests for most of us. And so when we can start recognizing that there is an embodied knowledge, there is an embodied understanding, that our body is involved in the processing and regulation of energy and information flow. And that's not just internally, right? As I said, that's the flow of information and energy between two people as much as it is within each person. And so when we look at this and we recognize how much the body has to do with this, then what we do is we get out of our head. There's another one, right? There's another cliche term that we use all the time. Get out of my head, right? Yeah, no, I'm not in my head anymore. I'm in my entire body, right? And this, once we do connect these two, then we start to open ourselves up to the ability, or the potential even, of processing and regulating information and energy, you know, through the entire organism that we are. And it's just, it's not really anything that's that important to understand. This is not very important to understand, but it is very important to practice, or I should say it's very beneficial to practice. And so the way we do this is very, very simply to, because remembering that, and this is again where the brain and the mind, where's the difference? Where's the line that separates the two? I don't think there is a line that separates the two. I think there's a lot of overlap, right? But I think that the aspect of the mind that people, I think we shortchange what the mind is when we consider it just part of the brain, right? But when we talk about the mind, what we're often referring to, or what is included in that, is the attention that we give something. Now, here's a little echo of what we're talking about here, right? Now, many, many, many scientists will use this following phrase: where attention goes, energy flows. Now, I've said that here. That we had an episode all about this a few weeks ago. And that's what I mean, that it's all about energy. And so if I am paying attention to this one problem in my life, right? Let's say I'm going through a financial difficulty, right? If I am paying attention only to that, or not only, but because we only can pay attention to one thing, right? We're fooled in the fact that we multitask and stuff, but all that is switching your attention very quickly from one thing to another. You can only attend to one thing at a time. You can have a peripheral awareness of lots of things, but you can only focus your attention on one thing, okay? And so when we focus our attention, that is where our energy goes. So if I focus my attention on the problem with the bank, the money problems, right? And I just, if I'm constantly just letting my mind focus on that, okay, which is part of my brain, but it's also my whole body. Because what's happening here now, this is where we sort of take a big step, right? But let me finish my thought first of all. So as I attend to this, as I let this one problem in my life, permeate or completely sort of co-opt my and even hijack my attention and domineer my attention, then the whole world feels like it's just this problem. Right? Because all of my energy and all of the information flow and everything is centered completely upon this issue. Now, it could also go in the other way, right? If you're planning a wedding, for instance, right? And you're thinking nothing but the wedding. If you could avoid the stress and not think about what's going to go wrong with the wedding, but either way, you're then focusing on something that might bring, feelings of optimism and potential and openness, because you're focusing on this beautiful day that's coming up, right? Although it's still going to probably result in negative emotions, but we can talk about that at a different time. Because really the thing is to be present, right? That's always the case, because everything that's happening, the wedding is not happening right now, right? The money problems, whatever, because it's not a question of, okay, I don't have enough money in the bank, right? It's a question of, am I going to be able to pay for X, Y, and Z on this date, that date, the other date, right? So it's not something that's happening here, right? It's not something that's present. And so when we allow ourselves to slip into that sort of, that realm of attention where, we're forcing ourselves to pay attention to this one thing, well, then that's what we're going to respond to, right? And when I say respond, remember, there are 3 ways that we experience everything in our lives and that we respond to everything in our lives. One is in the body. The other is in the emotions, and the third is in the thoughts and the sort of narrative that we create in our lives. Which is to say that as I'm focusing my attention on a problem in my life, then my body, my emotions, and my thoughts are all going to respond to this pretty much theoretical problem that's happening in my life. Now, that's not to say, like, if something is happening here and now, right? Like yesterday, my family, we lost electricity in the house, right? Because of some issue. And so that was something that was happening right now, right? So now I have to devote my resources, my energy, my information flow, and devote all this to solving this problem because it's 97 degrees outside and it's hot as crazy in this house. And my kids are going to start getting really cranky and everything's going to start getting, everybody's getting very uncomfortable right now. Okay? And so that is not just a function of the brain, right? And so now, again, what I said was we're going to make this big shift, right? As you know, another scientist that I talk about a lot is a guy by the name of Bessel van der Kolk. Bessel van der Kolk is the author of a seminal book about trauma called The Body Keeps the Score, okay? And this is really one of the things I was really hoping to get to in this podcast episode because, that's the thing. Right? We're not just living in our heads. There is information and understanding and wisdom in our bodies as well. Now, let's connect these two thoughts. As I'm thinking here about money problems, right? And again, it's not like right now, right? I have food in the fridge, I have water, I have tea bags that I can make tea with, I have electricity so I can do my podcast, I can do my work. I have everything right now that I need. Now, when the food runs out, do I have enough to buy more? That's a different question. That's not happening right now. Right now, the money is just zeros and ones and digits in a computer bank account, right? It's just theoretical stuff in there. And it doesn't matter until something happens that I actually need money for, which right now I don't. I have enough gas in my car to get to my hockey game. I have enough, my stick is taped up, my skates are sharpened. I literally do not need any money. Today. Now, that's not every day, but today that is true. So today, for me to be paying attention on the absence of money is just bringing myself out of the present moment. But now, again, connecting that back to Van der Kolk, Dr. Van der Kolk, who talks about the body keeps the score. In our lives, we experience things, right? As I mentioned the other day, the first 8 years of our lives are basically a programming period, right? Where the mirror neurons in our brain are just soaking up life and soaking up the appropriate responses and the inappropriate responses and the survival, mechanisms and the social connecting mechanisms and the attachment styles and all of that stuff is happening and programming us, right? Now, for some of us, that whole experience, for all of us, that whole experience included our relationship to money and finances, right? So if you grew up in a family that was stable, that, mom or dad just had a regular job and they were happy, there was no, able to take, whatever modest or maybe not modest vacations, and you just, you had what you need, but it wasn't some clinging and strife involved with money, right? It was just a sort of, easygoing relationship that you had with money, that your parents had with money. Well, then you're going to handle the ups and downs of finance in a way that is different from someone who had maybe some trauma involved with money, right? Maybe for someone, there was poverty as a child during those first 8 years, right? In which case, there was, food scarcity or food insecurity, if you will. Right? Like I know people who grew up and they didn't know where their next meal was coming from. Right? They went days where, you got to eat a couple pieces of bread and that's it. Right? And so when this person, I'm speaking of somebody specific, that when this person, encounters a money situation of any kind, it's not just the here and now that they're thinking of, that they're processing that situation through. right? If let's say there's just like a month in which they're having a hard time paying all the bills, right? Now, for most of us, that's not the end of the world, right? It's okay. Yeah, it's not positive, and it's a hassle, and it requires work and all that kind of stuff, but we survive it, most of us, right? But to someone who has a connection or a relationship with money that includes, food scarcity or food insecurity, that even just a temporary, dip in the finances is going to represent something to them that is much different than it would if somebody who grew up in that stable environment that I described a moment ago. And so what's the difference there, right? It's not just what's happening in the brain. Not even in just the skull brain, just the heart brain, or just the gut brain, or even all three of those. It also is embodied. It's something that lives in the memory of our cells. It's really intense the way this works. But this is the way that so what happens is, okay, this is how it sort of works, right? We experience the financial difficulty. We're talking about trauma person, right? The person who grew up in childhood with food insecurity, right? They experience a financial setback, right? The cellular memory of their body, right? Which includes, of course, it's not limited to, but it certainly includes the skull brain, the heart brain, and the gut brain, but it also includes the nervous system. It includes the vagus nerve and the whole sympathetic response. And it includes even a hormonal process is involved with this, right? The body remembers what it was like, not as a memory where we sit and we think of, oh man, when I was 12 years old sitting there in my bedroom and I was so hungry. I mean, that might happen also, but that's not what I'm talking about here. What I'm talking about is a memory that is felt. It's in the body. It is not in the brain. Not only in the brain, of course, it's all everywhere, but it comes from the body. Now, this is not just true with trauma either, right? This is true with everything, okay? Like, anything that you experience as a, again, that's what I mean when the body responds to it, right? Because your body has a memory of everything that's ever happened to it. And so there's a feeling that happens, a feeling in the body that's indescribable because your feeling is different from my feeling, I mean, that's not something that's uniform between all of us, between any of us. I mean, certainly if you have a certain family, those feelings could be, similar, I guess, but how do we even describe the feelings to know, right? It's something that becomes indescribable because it's not part of our vocabulary. It's not something that's happening in the brain. It's something that's happening in a wide spread experience of the body, which also includes the emotions, because the emotions are manifest in the body. And again, the emotions are also something we cannot take the emotions out of our body like we can take a pen off my desk. Nor can we take the feelings, the physical. We can't take tension out of the body. I mean, we can relieve tension, but we can't take tension out of the body like a pen and put it on a desk and say, there it is. There's the tension, right? And we can't do that with our thoughts either, right? Now the thing is, though, that where do those thoughts come from? Yes, because the thoughts are happening in that skull encased brain. The thoughts are nothing more than one neuron connecting to another and a little spark and a little firing, and that's a thought, right? But where that thought comes from is the body. And this has been studied extensively and unequivocally, okay, that if I'm feeling a certain way in my body, there are certain thoughts that are going to arise in my mind. Certain thoughts that are going to arise in my brain, pardon me. I just made the mistake. I don't know if you even heard that because the video cut out for a second. I had to start a new one. But I said that the feelings in my body impact or promote or create the thoughts that I have in my mind, but it's really in my brain that I'm talking about, right? And so I'm just keeping it real and owning that, okay? I don't want to try to get away with something here. But the point is, though, that this is extensively, exhaustively understood, scientifically, right? That the way my body is feeling is limiting or defining the thoughts that arise in my brain. And but then again, that's also the mind, right? It's also how I process that whole thing, right? So again, it's not either or, it's both, right? But the important thing and so this is like with memories, right? Like let's look at it in terms of a memory. You have a memory of, say, your high school graduation, right? Those of you who graduated high school, any milestone of your life will do, okay? Use whatever one you have. We all experience something like that, right? Let's say our first kiss, right? And maybe that's not true for most people. Let's say the first time that we heard our favorite music, right? What became our favorite music, right? We all experience something like that, right? And we might be able to conjure up memories of that, right? Where we were, what the circumstances were, who else was around us, what the music was, all that kind of stuff, right? Every time you remember that memory changes a little bit, because the memory is not like going through your hard drive on your computer, like go into Finder, go into that folder, find the file you're looking for, double click it, and here's an image, right? There's the memory. It doesn't work like that. The memory itself is part of this process that we talk about of regulating and processing energy and information flow, which is to say that how you are feeling right now when you remember that thing is going to actually change the memory that you have of that thing. That's why in a court of law, to the contradiction of television shows and stuff like that, and cop procedural shows and stuff like that, in a court of law, eyewitness testimony is seen as very, very unreliable, because we understand this to be true in our science, that as we remember something, we're remembering it not as this indisputable, like a photograph of some kind, right? We're remembering it based not on how we were feeling when the thing happened, but we're remembering based on how we're feeling right here, right now, because this is where the memory's happening and when the memory's happening. Okay? So what does all this mean? I got to wrap this up here for you now, right? So what we do when we practice mindfulness, right? What we're doing is we're bringing all of this together, and we're connecting back in to the body, the emotions, and the process of knowing and thinking, right? And it's very simple. And the thing about it is that those folks that John Kabat-Zinn talks about, right? The people who, think that their shoulders are there just to hold their head on so that they can think their way through life, right? That is an unhealthy way that people are living, right? That's not the way that we're designed to be, okay? And when we can start to get back into the connection with our body, then this natural sort of intuitiveness, this natural sort of healing happens. That's way beyond anything I could even describe to you, and way beyond anything we need to even understand in a descriptive way. We have to experience it, right? And as we experience it, as we experience this connection between what we call the mind and the body, all these connections start happening, because what's really happening there is that there's a neuronal change that's going on through the process of this connection. Okay, so literally the neurons that fire in your brain are changing their pathways, and they're creating new ways in which you can understand what's going on here. And so again, it's not something I could even describe to you, and it's not something you even need to know. All we got to do is do the practices. And the practices are very simple, right? And one of my favorite, and you can email me if you want a copy of this, right? Just 3 times a day, maybe 4. Just take a few, like a minute, maybe a minute, and just check in with what is your body feeling right now. Just right now, just what do I feel in my body? Now, sometimes you could feel, some pain somewhere in your body. Maybe you feel a little stiff, a little sore. I just played hockey for the first time in a couple of weeks, and I played 2 days in a row. I'm a little sore. I got to play again today, right? Or maybe you're feeling some tension. Generally, I like to recommend people feel first into their chest, then into their throat, then into their face, right? Just notice what's there. But then also feeling into your body is also just noticing your breath, which is to say, noticing the way your body is breathing. Because you don't have to do anything to breathe, right? You do not have to consciously think about breathing or focus on breathing or try to breathe. Your body and my body have been breathing this whole time that you've been watching this. Even though I'm on recording, right? Wherever I am while you're watching this, I'm breathing. Trust, I hope anyway. If not, there's bigger problems in the next podcast episode. But the point is that our body is not, it doesn't require our attention or our energy or our effort to breathe. It's just breathing. And so every time I just notice that, and the way we notice it is in the rise and fall. I just love that sense of rising and falling, right? If we just, sometimes I even put my hand on my abdomen. Certainly when I was first practicing this stuff, I used to do this a lot. And this is just anywhere, anytime, not even as a formal practice or even semi-formal practice, just anytime, just place your hand on your abdomen and feel it moving. That's your breath. Right? Now, some people feel it more in the chest, and I mean, it's not ideal. It's optimal to feel it in the abdomen, but, you could also feel it in the air that passes through your nose and your mouth, right? And then when we do that, every time we pay attention to that, our energy and the information flow is coming from the head into the body, if you will. I'm going to just leave it at that because I don't want to argue the semantics of it, right? But now after you've done that for like 10 seconds or so, 20 seconds, right? Now check in with your emotions and feel, and again, like you might even cross over and say, where do I feel this emotion right now? But some people have a hard time identifying the emotions, and that's something to practice, right? Because it's healthy for us to understand what the emotions are, right? And so name 1 or 2 of them, right? Or just name positive emotions and negative emotions. Am I feeling positive and hopeful and energetic and optimistic? Or am I feeling heavy and sad and I don't want to, just don't feel it today, That's all you got to know about the emotions. You don't have to say, okay, is it hope or is it excitement or is it, dread or is it fear? That stuff's not that important, right? I mean, it's fascinating and you can certainly, travel down that road, if you will, down that rabbit hole. But for this purpose, it's just noticing I'm experiencing emotions right now, right? And maybe right now they feel pretty neutral, but maybe right now they don't feel pretty neutral. And this is what they feel, okay? Then we come to the thoughts, and this is where so many people say, well, Art, I mean, of course I'm thinking about my body and my emotions, duh. And touche, yeah, you got me. Or as an old friend of mine used to say, douche, with a D, get it? So really what we're not saying is what we're thinking about right now, but instead, if I pause for a moment, and if I just allow my thoughts to arise, right? And I'm not purposely thinking of something, right? I'm not calling up an image of something. I'm not, processing like thinking about my emotions, for instance, right? But instead, what just arises in my thoughts? Because in a very real way, the thoughts are just like the breath that way. Because even though our body is always breathing, I could say to you, take a deep breath and hold it for a few seconds. And you can do that. I can say, think of a hippopotamus, and you can think of a hippopotamus. But at any random time during the day, who knows what pops into the mind? It's not like I stop thinking when I stop trying to think. just like the breath. The thoughts are always happening because they're always responding to whatever it is that I'm experiencing right now. And so just see what thoughts arise in those few seconds that you want to sit there. Now, again, you could do this practice for 2 hours at a time if you want. Do it your whole life, and that's really what starts to happen, right? If we do it 3 or 4 times a day for even a minute or two, eventually it becomes something like I'm doing this all the time without any effort at all. It's just become the trait of my personality to be aware. Right? I'm constantly sensing my body breathing. I'm constantly sensing tension as it arises. I'm constantly sensing all the different stuff that happens in my body. And I'm also listening to my thoughts in a way that is disidentified with them. Right? Because my thoughts, just like my breath, they're not me. They're not all of what I am. They're just these little neurons that are firing in this one brain that I have. It's not even the only brain that I have. So the idea then is to do this practice. And again, it's not about understanding it. I think understanding this stuff is very valuable and helpful and fascinating and wonderful. So don't stop reading. Don't stop watching videos. Don't stop watching this YouTube channel, of course, or listening to this podcast. No, anything but that. I'm just kidding. My ego is not attached to this anymore. It used to be. It's not anymore. But it's don't stop your pursuit of knowledge and your curious drive to understand things. That would be a mistake. But instead, think of it as 2 ways that we learn. Right? We learn through the understanding, the teaching, the reading, the YouTube channels, the videos, and the podcasts, right? But we also learn using a completely different circuitry of the brain. We learn through experience, direct experience of the thing we're trying to learn. Okay? That happens when you learned penmanship when you were little, and it happens when you learn mindfulness now. Okay? That it is the direct experience of doing the thing that changes the way it all works internally. Okay? So the more we focus and we go through the process of focusing on the body, the emotions, the thoughts, day after day, a few times a day, it changes the way that we relate to these things so that we always have an awareness of it. Just like riding a bike or driving a car. I mean, most of you now have been driving a car since you're about 16 years old. So that means that right now I could toss you the keys to any car, as long as you know how to drive a stick shift. But I could toss you the keys to any automatic car, and you could hop in and just start driving. Maybe take you a couple of seconds, like, wait a minute, I got to push this button to turn it on. Okay, I was supposed to push the brake. We'll go through a couple of little moments of that kind of stuff, right? But the actual driving, nobody needs to think about it, right? Even like putting on the turn signal, it's just an automatic flip of the finger. We don't think, oh man, I'm turning right. I better turn on this turn signal. So let me reach my hand out and flip the wand there. No, it just click, done. That's the way this work gets to, okay? Because through the direct experience of it, it just becomes like a personality trait, like a second nature to you, or your nature is what it becomes. All right, folks, I hope you found this interesting. I feel like it was maybe a little ranging today. I hope it coalesced for you, and I hope it made sense, and I hope you found it helpful. I know we also, I think, went a little long today, so I appreciate your patience with that. If you have any questions or if you want the copy of this checking in practice that I gave, there's a little more to it than I described, but even if you just did what I described, you'll be fine, okay? But you got to do it. You can't just think about it. You got to do it, okay? And so if you want any information about that or the written instructions, and by all means, if you want some coaching around this, if you feel like you need help to get this experience into your life, don't think about the limitations to it. Don't think about how much time you don't have, how much money you don't have, how much art's not going to do it for you. Don't think about that stuff, but instead just ask me the question. Okay, let's get into a conversation. Let's see where it leads to. Okay? Let's be curious. All right. I wish you all well. Send me an email if you have any questions or if you want the copy of these instructions, okay? art@artburnscoaching.com. All right. See you all later. Be back soon.